Ever heard of a teenager who inherited an empire on the brink of collapse, outsmarted the most powerful men in Rome, and then ruled for decades, ushering in an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity? It sounds like the plot of a blockbuster movie, but it's the real-life story of one of history's most remarkable figures. Today, we read diving deep into the life of the man who found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. This is the story of Gaius Octavius, better known to the world as Augustus. Our story begins not in the gilded halls of power, but in a relatively modest family. Born in 63 BC, Gaius Octavius was the son of a senator who had climbed the political ladder. But his life as trajectory was forever altered by one fateful connection. His great-uncle was none other than Julius Caesar. Caesar, having no legitimate sons of his own, saw something special in the young, intelligent, and ambitious Octavius. He took the boy under his wing, ensuring he received the best education and military training. Imagine being a teenager and your mentor is the most powerful man in the known world. The pressure must have been immense, but Octavius absorbed it all, learning the intricate dance of Roman politics and warfare from the master himself. He was studying abroad in Apollonia when the shocking news arrived in 44 BC. Julius Caesar had been assassinated on the Ides of March. This was the ultimate test. Octavius was just 18 years old. He was away from home, with limited resources and only a few trusted friends. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, believed they had restored the Republic. Meanwhile, Caesar's loyal and powerful general, Mark Antony, expected to be the natural successor. Most advisors told Octavius to lay low, to forget about his dangerous inheritance. But Octavius did something incredibly bold. He sailed for Italy, not to hide, but to claim what he believed was rightfully his. When Caesar's will was read, it was a bombshell. He had posthumously adopted Octavius as his son and heir, bequeathing him his name and an immense fortune. Now imagine the scene in Rome. Here comes this skinny, often sickly, 19-year-old demanding his inheritance and his place at the table. The seasoned politicians and battle-hardened generals, especially Mark Antony, barely gave him a second thought. They laughed him off, seeing him as a mere boy playing at being a man. This was their first and most critical mistake. They underestimated him. Octavian used the magic of Caesar's name to rally public support and, crucially, the loyalty of Caesar's veteran legions. He was a master of propaganda, presenting himself as the pious son dedicated to avenging his beloved father. He played Antony and the Senate against each other with a skill that defied his age. When the Senate tried to use him to defeat Antony and then discard him, Octavian flipped the script. He marched his army on Rome and forced them to recognize his power. This led to one of the most unlikely and terrifying alliances in history, the Second Triumvirate. Octavian, his rival Mark Antony, and another of Caesar's generals, Lepidus, joined forces. Their stated goal was to hunt down Caesar's assassins, but their methods were brutal. They initiated a series of proscriptions, essentially a state-sanctioned hit list, to eliminate their political enemies and seize their wealth to fund their armies. It was a bloody and ruthless start to his career, a dark chapter that showed Octavian was willing to do whatever it took to secure power. With their enemies in Rome eliminated, the triumvirs turned their attention to the assassins. At the Battle of Philippi in 40 BC, the forces of Brutus and Cassius were crushed. The last defenders of the old republic were dead. With their common enemy gone, the cracks in the triumvirate began to show. The Roman world was carved up between them. Lepidus was quickly sidelined, leaving the two titans, Octavian and Antony, to circle each other. Octavian took control of the West, consolidating his power in Italy and presenting himself as the traditional Roman leader. Antony, meanwhile, took the east, and it was there that he rekindled his legendary affair with the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. This is where the propaganda war went into overdrive. Octavian, the master strategist, painted Antony as a man who had gone native. He portrayed him as a slave to a foreign queen, someone who had abandoned his Roman heritage and planned to move the capital of the empire to Alexandria. This narrative was incredibly effective. Roman pride was a powerful tool, and Octavian wielded it like a weapon. The tension finally snapped. Octavian obtained and published what he claimed was Antony's will, which supposedly confirmed all the worst fears of the Roman people that Antony intended to be buried in Egypt and leave Roman territories to his children with Cleopatra. Public outrage was immense. The Senate declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. It was a brilliant political move that framed the conflict as a defense of Rome against a foreign threat, not another destructive civil war. The final showdown came in 31 BC at the naval battle of Actium. It was less of a dramatic battle and more of a strategic collapse. They fled back to Egypt with Octavian in hot pursuit. A year later, cornered in Alexandria and faced with certain defeat, both Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives. At the age of 32, Octavian stood alone. The civil wars that had plagued Rome for a century were finally over. He was the undisputed master of the Roman world, but now he faced his greatest challenge. How do you rule an empire you won through force without becoming a hated dictator like your great-uncle? The memory of Caesar's fate was a constant warning. Octavian knew he couldn't just declare himself king. Romans had a deep-seated hatred for that word. So, he orchestrated a political masterpiece. In 27 BC, in a carefully staged event, he appeared before the Senate and announced he was returning all his powers to them and restoring the Republic. It was a genius move. The senators, many of whom owed their positions to him and were terrified of more civil war, practically begged him to stay. They showered him with honors and new titles. Most importantly, they granted him the name Augustus, meaning revered or illustrious. He also took the title Princeps, which meant first citizen. On the surface, the old republic seemed to be back. The Senate still met, elections were held, and magistrates served their terms. But in reality, Augustus held all the true power. He controlled the most important provinces, commanded the loyalty of virtually the entire military, and held a personal fortune that dwarfed the state treasury. He had created a new system, one that we now call the Roman Empire, but he did it by cloaking it in the traditions of the Republic. He was an emperor in all but name, a monarch disguised as a magistrate. This clever arrangement allowed him to rule for an astonishing 41 years without facing any serious challenge to his authority. So what did he do with all this power? He ended a century of civil war and initiated a period of stability and relative peace that became known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It lasted for 200 years. He completely reformed the army, creating a permanent, professional standing force loyal to the emperor, not to individual generals. This prevented the kind of civil wars that had brought him to power. He launched massive building projects, transforming Rome with temples, aqueducts, and public buildings. He established police and fire brigades for the city. He reformed the tax system, making it more efficient and less corrupt. He promoted marriage and family, seeing a strong moral fabric as essential to a strong state. He was a patron of the arts, and his reign saw a golden age of literature, with poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid flourishing under his sponsorship. Of course, his reign wasn't without its troubles. He faced personal tragedies, outliving his chosen heirs, including his brilliant general Agrippa and his grandsons Gaius and Lucius. The question of succession was a constant source of anxiety. In the end, he was forced to adopt his stepson, Tiberius, a man he personally disliked but who was a capable administrator. He also suffered a devastating military defeat in 09 AD, when 3 entire Roman legions were wiped out in the Teutoburg forest in Germania. The loss haunted him for the rest of his life. But these setbacks were exceptions in a long and overwhelmingly successful reign. When Augustus died in 14 AD at the age of 75, he left behind a transformed world. The chaotic, crumbling Roman Republic was gone. In its place was a stable, prosperous, and vastly expanded Roman Empire that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. He was a ruthless politician, a brilliant propagandist, and a patient, meticulous administrator. He was a man of profound contradictions, a bloody warlord who became a bringer of peace, an autocrat who called himself the first citizen. He wasn't just a man who won a war, he was a man who built a new world on the ashes of the old. The system he created was so effective and so durable that it became the model for empires for the next 2,000 years. So, who was Octavian? He was the architect of the Roman Empire, the first and perhaps the greatest of all its emperors. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Rome. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Augustus, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next historical adventure. Let me know in the comments which historical figure you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.